Hi, welcome to Lawyer Podcast. Chauniqua Young, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Good. We're meeting for the first time actually, and um, you know my cousin actually from, I believe, Sarah Lawrence up in New York.
That's right.
So what did you, and I believe that was for undergrad, and what was your experience like at Sarah Lawrence? Did that somehow, because I know that to be a liberal arts college, did that your experience there say, hey, I want to be a lawyer? Or how'd that come about?
Um, that's a really interesting question. I love Sarah Lawrence. It's a liberal arts college, so it's really the place where you can just explore your own interests. And there's a lot of writing involved, and that's pretty, as you know, pretty essential to being a lawyer is being a really good writer. So I think that was a good foundation. The school's body, I think, also focuses on social justice, so it was not uncommon to have some sort of activism or demonstration in the spring of every year, whether it's demanding diversity among the faculty or some other support. When I was there, it was actually a very weird time in New York. Amadou Diallo was shot, and the police officers who shot him got off. And so there was a huge protest in the Bronx, and then subsequent to that, a large protest in Manhattan, when a lot of famous people and non-famous people got arrested. But it was an amazing time of activism. It was that was the Amadou Diallo incident was a stain on New York City's history, but it was also a time of activism. And then that either the next year or the year that same year, the Klan decided to demonstrate in Lower Manhattan, which was unheard of, especially given New York City and the diversity in New York City. And thousands and thousands of people turned out to demonstrate against the Klan. And the police at that point were in the position of protecting the Klan. There were a few Klan members and thousands of demonstrators surrounding them. And so that also was a moment of awakening and social consciousness, and also, brought to the forefront that racism still exists in this country. So those incidents happened when I was at Sarah Lawrence, and they were very formative in terms of my ultimately becoming a lawyer, and really wanting to be a lawyer to pursue justice on behalf of my clients.
Yeah, it sounds like in some ways there were like pivotal moments in your school or education that, that it could, like, this time period right now can be that same way for you, for others. And so
Right.
a lot more enlightening. And of course, your surroundings with Sarah Lawrence, what my cousin told me about it, can be helpful in that way. Um,
Right.
did you do like poetry or what do you call, like, writing workshops? I know she did that a lot.
She did. Yeah, I think that's
Spoken
how we
word, that's
know
right.
each
That's what I
other,
was trying to.
is because she did a lot of spoken word and she was very good. And I was in the spoken word scene. That's some of I took a few courses um in poetry and some performance poetry, and actually did a little bit of spoken word during my time at Sarah Lawrence, as many people did.
There you
But
go. You can write that on your resume.
well, when
Someone's
I
got to
tell
be
people,
interested in that.
it's funny because, like, when I tell people that we don't have majors, as you know, at Sarah Lawrence, but we have concentrations. And
Mm.
so I tell people that I concentrated in performance poetry and economics, and people look at me like, how did you end up practicing law? But, there's kind of a synergy there, right? You're
Right,
studying
right.
the written word, and that's what you do as a lawyer. You just are putting words together differently.
I'm sure that could help in your trial proceedings, or opening or closing statements, at least.
Yeah, it's funny. So it's just a different type of performance, right? I
Sure.
mean, I'm a different person too. I'm no longer a young person, and so the way that I speak, to a judge or as an advocate is different from poetry. But there were times, I think, when I was starting off, that I relied on my performance poetry background to really say things with conviction, and that's part of what you need to
Right,
do to be a good advocate and as a lawyer. So maybe there's an element there of something
right,
that I
right.
took from my
Yeah, you're not wavering in what you're trying to say in front of a judge, or
right.
even a client. Yeah, that's a good point.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
that's
think
right.
that's helpful to know that I mean, I graduated from a liberal arts college myself, at University of North Texas, but I didn't do any spoken word. But I think that's helpful for, let's say, law students, or right now they can, or I mean, college students, if they're interested in law school in this time period, that their skills can translate in some ways.
Right.
Well, I know I had a chance to read about your background, and so you spent some time. I know you're a New Yorker, but you spent some time in California, in
Right.
Oakland, I believe.
I did.
So
Yes.
I've only visited in the Bay Area, but I'm sure a lot has changed at that time. But when you were in Oakland, I think it was at the East Bay Community Law Center. What prompted you to move across the country and from, I don't know if you were in big law then, but I think you were doing a big law, then clerkship, and then back. But what was in that time period, what made you decide to go to a community law center?
It's a really good question. So I actually went to, I was at the East Bay Community Law Center before I went to law school. And so what prompted me to come to New York was getting into law school and attending law school in New York. But I mean, that experience was still formative. EBCLC provides legal services to low-income and no-income communities in the areas of welfare assistance and tenants' rights. And so I worked at EBCLC before I went to law school, and it was inspiring to see kind of lawyers who cared very deeply about justice and the communities that they were serving. So it taught me about the kind of lawyer that I wanted to be. And then afterwards, I came to, I attended Cardozo School of Law in New York. I got a fellowship at the Center for Constitutional Rights, where I litigated civil rights cases. And then I my fellowship ended, and then I went to Outten Golden LLP, where I currently am, and where I work on class actions involving employment law. I took some 14 months off to clerk for a judge in the Southern District of New York, Magistrate Judge Barbara Moses, and then returned to Outten Golden to continue to be a litigator.
That's for most lawyers, they wouldn't have an opportunity to look at those different types of workplace settings. Clerkship, community law center, big law. That's quite impressive. And I'm sure they provide different work environment in general, right? Like speaking with partners, managing partners, getting approvals. I'm sure I've never worked in big law. I've always been a solo. So I that's another reason for having this podcast, just sharing your experiences. So thank you. How do you think your clerkship was helpful in that it helped you understand how to communicate with a judge, to know maybe what they're looking for? Because there's, in law school, we learn, like you have to figure out what is important. We can literally write everything in a bar essay or exam question essay.
I did, yes. I mean, that's exactly right. So I was fortunate because I got a clerkship after practicing for several years as a litigator, and so I was able to just jump in and review the party submissions and be able to make a recommendation to the judge and really understand what they were asking for. And I think it did help me frame. Now that I'm a litigator, that experience helps me frame the request that I have to the court. Put your ask up front. Address all of the hard cases in your opponent's briefing. Address the hard arguments for the court, even if you don't think they'll win. Give the court something. So I mean, it was incredibly formative. And then just seeing what a difficult job the court has to do, and they are really. I was fortunate because my judge, and I think this isn't uncommon, was really committed to justice and fairness and getting it right. Our writing had to be super polished. The research and case law had to be super polished. So, it was a great experience. It really helped refine my practice of the law because it made me somewhat of a perfectionist in that what I present to the court, I think I want to be as perfect as I can make it, and really help guide the court in terms of coming to an understanding about, what I'm asking for, or why the court should rule in my favor. And it's similar with oral argument. I think, knowing that the court is really struggling with how to do the right thing, and so really trying to provide clear guidance to the court on how to weigh in on the requests that I'm making.
Right. You're talking about like guiding. What's that word? Roadmap. I haven't used that word in a long time, probably since law school. Road mapping. But you're right. Judges, from what I found, they want to do the right thing. If they're setting new precedent, they really have to look at policy reasons also, not just the legal reasons, right? That's what pushes the lever there, or tips the scale. So you spent 14 months there. Now you're back at Big Law. Can you tell us a little bit more about your day-to-day in Big Law?
Sure. And it's very gracious of you to say that we are in Big Law. We do have offices in New York, LA, San Francisco, and DC, although currently everyone's working remotely, so what does that even mean anymore? But we are a civil rights law firm, and we represent individuals and groups of workers on claims related to their employment. And as I said before, I work on bringing class actions on behalf of employers. So we are a mid-sized law firm. We're not, we're not as big as big corporate firms. So in some ways, it is sometimes David versus Goliath. Although we have, more resources than some other organizations who are really, have fewer staff and lawyers and support than we do. So that. The ethos, I think, is there. So I can compare my experience at the Center for Constitutional Rights with my experience at Outten Golden. And, I think it's very similar in that, civil rights lawyers just work really hard. And they, at least at ONG, my current firm, Outten Golden, and CCR, Center for Constitutional Rights, I mean, we believe in workers, we believe in workers' rights, we believe in justice. And we want to win, and I have to say my coworkers are very, very good lawyers. So there's a lot in common with, kind of nonprofits and the structure of the firm. I think it's a little bit different because at the bottom line, one calculus that we have to make as a firm is really taking cases that that will generate revenue in some ways, cases that we can afford to bring. Because if we take a series of losses, whether we'll be able to sustain the firm's work and pay everyone. So there are some calculations that we make as a firm that I don't think are made as a nonprofit, where I think you probably have a little bit more flexibility in terms of what cases you can bring. Although there are probably the same considerations, right? You still want to win, right? So you still want to take cases. Exactly. That's exactly right.
Not to say you don't want to fight for other people, but if you had to only take 50 cases a year, you have to pick and choose, right?
That's right.
Or what can make the most impact if you're taking up to the appellate level. So you mentioned, I think I was mentioning Big Law because Outten Golden, you refer to yourselves as public interest law. That's what you focus on, civil rights law. And I think in just my experience going through law school there, I recall hearing about Outten Golden. So I maybe that's why I think Big Law, and just relative to the practice area, what y'all focus on, I think it's of course impressive, because here in Texas, I don't think anyone refers to them as public interest, even though I at least consider myself focusing on public interest work. But so I think that's an important tagline, if you will, because people need to know, clients, I think in your type of area of law, I think it's they put more trust in you. I would consider that, right? Especially with class action lawsuits. Can you explain to our audience who are less experienced or younger lawyers, or even law school graduates, how difficult it is to get a class action? Because I'm sure there's a lot of nuances there. I've never had to certify a class, but
yeah, I mean, sorry, I crossed my arms again. Is there feedback?
You're good.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you're right. First, I think you find plaintiffs, ideally more than one, but sometimes you just can't find several plaintiffs. So, you move forward with what you have if you think there are good class claims there. And then I think you really think about whether um, the class that you're the action that you're trying to bring involves some sort of policy or common practice that affects everyone in the same way. Oftentimes in an employment law case, that looks like a policy that compensates, that has the effect of compensating women more than men, right? Or Black people more than white people. So you look for those types of policies, and those are the things that you challenge, right? It's a lot more difficult to bring a class action lawsuit if you don't have some thread that connects everyone together. In fact, I don't know if it's possible to do that. And then, there's there's lots of discovery, right? So back to the thread that I was talking about, you really need evidence of that in order to have your class certified. And so there's often multiple witness depositions. There's depositions of your plaintiff, and then there are depositions of corporate officers about the kind of practice that you're challenging. There's lots of written discovery. So it's just a more robust discovery process than in an individual case when there's just probably less at stake, and you've got less to prove in the sense that you don't have to prove that thread that's harming the entire class in the same way.
Mhm.
So those are the considerations, and sometimes you don't win, and sometimes you do win. So they're
Right.
risky. They're worth bringing.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like it. And that sounds like a definitely as if you're preparing for a trial in itself in a way, because of I'm sure depending on the amount of people in the class, but having to find that common thread and encourage people to be part of the suit, right? So thank you for explaining that. Now, knowing that you've had some time in the East Bay Community Law Center, and now you're back in New York, and with the current climate of the Black Lives Matter movement, and the defund the police movement, do you find that there's any way lawyers like us, or in your capacity, your practice area, can can shift it more for the movement?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So I really like the recent trend among law firms to publicly say that Black Lives Matter. I've seen that quite a bit, actually, with the recent protests and uprisings. And I think with that, law firms have begun focusing anew on increasing diversity in the legal profession, including through examining how their own workplaces can be more inclusive and less biased. And so I'm hoping that as the legal profession looks inward, that this will inform our sense of justice and how we practice the law, and whether in the plaintiff's bar or the defense bar. So I'm hoping, that I think Black Lives Matter has the sense of triggering the profession itself to really look inward and try and address inequalities within our profession. And I hope that manifests in how we begin to seek justice, whatever side that we're on in the court, and
Right.
articulate what justice looks like.
Right. I would think that even if someone's not in public interest law, that they have gone to law school because they want to do better. Maybe not just for a specific client, but just to help push the needle more towards any specific cause. And right now, it's obvious what the cause is, and some people are still. I know some lawyers are still countering it, and they don't understand what the hashtag defund police really means. I think they're looking for a specific definition, and it's hard to define a movement when it's happening. There's not a specific leader defining what that is. It's kind of like, what does it mean to you individually, right? So now, I guess just to take it a step further in that question, um, about the movement. Have you found, especially in your time as a clerk as well, have you found any that maybe you have experienced, or someone, a colleague or someone else you've observed while waiting at a docket setting, experienced implicit bias?
Yeah, I mean, so I don't think that anyone in the legal profession is, is just immune. I think that there is bias in the industry, and I think I'm always concerned that stereotypes about Black people or about women or people of color generally will just kind of overwhelm, um, a judge or opposing counsel or co-counsel's perception of me, right? And so there's just always that concern that that folks will see, the outward facade first, and then pay attention to what I'm actually saying
Right.
second. I think, my firm has done a really good job. A few years back, a number of us, including partners, associates, sat down and we thought about how to make our workplace better. And that resulted in actually us bringing in a consultant and enacting a diversity plan. And so our firm meets regularly to talk about diversity and inclusion issues, and to try and put in place safeguards that will help our firm be better. And so, I mean, we've done the inward process that I was thinking that, that I was talking about. And I hope that through that process that we make the firm a better place to be. So yeah, that's where we're at with that.
Well, no, that's great because your firm's leadership. It sounds like they're taking those steps. They're taking very proactive steps. Because I think I wouldn't call it fear, but some people's concerns are that, sure, a corporation in general, not a law firm, but a corporation, are making those statements, posting on their website, but what does it mean at the end of the day? And at least internally, because of the with their workforce. So that's great to hear about your law firm. It's got
Yeah.
to start somewhere for each individual company. Now, the $1 million question for our audience is, if you if you had a chance to turn back the clock and you were, let's say, at Sarah Lawrence, or you're already in law school, first year, and you're like, oh, I'm struggling. I've got to read all these books. What kind of advice, let's say career advice, do you have starting out?
Well, so if I were to turn back time and give myself advice while in law school, I would just tell myself to really value and enjoy it. I think there were moments when law school felt like such a grind, as I'm sure you know, and I think I would have just said, you know what, make this a great time. Just dive in and really, really try and value the time that you get to just set aside time to learn. And so, that I don't know if I would have listened to myself. I think I probably knew that, but it didn't matter, when I was in law school. I also took classes and did some activities because I thought I should, rather than because I really wanted to. And I probably would tell myself to avoid those things and really just to do things that um, you enjoy, but also that you think will advance your career. So I would have taken some additional constitutional law classes, both because I love it and because it's the foundation of civil rights in the country, and because I just learned so much from my con law professors. And so I would have focused on that when I was in law school. I think in terms of career advice, I yeah, I mean, I think I'm very happy with my career. I'm very happy with how it turned out. I get to work with people who I really care about and who are in solidarity with me. And so I guess for folks who are out there looking and who are just entering the legal field as new lawyers, I mean, I would just say, really look at the workplace that you're going into. Ask around about your anticipate your new colleagues, and really try and find places where the people are good and where you can be, as Joe Biden would put it, simpatico with, because I think that's really important. I think you know, the movement, especially if you're a civil rights lawyer, can really feel isolating. And it really does help when you can find people who are in it with you and who are feel the same way you do about justice and can work with you and who you can learn from.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much. Um, you probably have been following the news about the recent passing of Congressman John Lewis and how, he's been in office several decades, and it's clearly his leadership has been very helpful to the American people. You and I know that voting is important, not just at for the presidency, but on a local level. Have you experienced, more of a practical question, in the field? Have you seen it in the judiciary in New York State, how voting can affect your outcome of a case? I think most of your cases probably in the federal district courts, but because in Texas, I can share an example. In Dallas County, I'm not going to mention names, but someone was elected, and that person elected as a probate judge, but didn't have any work experience in probate court. And you and I know that people who are non-lawyers don't have the time to research a judge, let alone a regular political candidate. So I think it's pretty important, but can you share your experience on how that can affect the case?
Well, yeah, I mean, the example that comes to mind is very similar. So I think that if you are able to elect kind of progressive folks to Congress, to your state legislature, I think it can have the outcome of passing laws that will support the community. And I think one example of that is AB 5 in California, which puts into law a case that was decided by the California Supreme Court that really applied very strict standards for when an employer can classify an employee as an independent contractor. And so, and I'm saying this is the kind of plaintiff's version of that, so an independent contractor. So I should say probably the right way to say it is when is an independent contractor actually an employee? And the test for when to determine that is known as 85, which is something that the California legislature just passed. And it basically really, it makes that, it's a very, very strict test for employers to prove. And I think it's a common sense test, but it's going to affect hundreds of thousands of workers, I think, especially those who are in the gig economy, such as Uber and Lyft workers and other drivers who are classified as independent contractors, because it will mean probably that companies will have to reclassify their workers as employees and give them the types of benefits that employees are entitled to. So I do think at the state level, having a progressive, government really helps. I think you can really pass protections that really advance workers' rights. And so, folks should definitely vote. It matters.
Definitely. What considerations do you think are important to share with constituents in general on what they can look for in a candidate? Let's say it could be a judge, or it can be a congressperson. In your experience, what do you think is helpful?
I mean, I think you can look at someone's professional history and see what they've done with their career. So, for example, someone who's devoted their lives to being a public defender, I think, would probably, has advocated for criminal defendants. I think, you could probably look at that and see that they would probably understand the problems with the criminal justice system. Not to say that someone who's a prosecutor won't understand those things as well. They might. But I think you can, I think that just reflects that you can look at someone's background and determine, their understanding and the types of choices they might make. I do think just, generally that there are organizations that put out ratings. So the ABA, I believe, reviews candidates office, for judicial office, and puts out a rating. So generally, the public can look at those ratings. I think, there, as a lawyer, I found it very helpful to be part of the National Lawyers Guild, the New York City chapter. I'm a legal observer with that chapter, and I know that the National Lawyers Guild puts out information and statements about kind of events that are happening, whether it's a legal decision or some sort of action that's taking place or a mass movement. The NLG will put out a statement like that. So I'm also a member of the National Employment Lawyers Association. It's similar. I think there's an advocacy arm that advances policies and legislation that supports workers' rights. And so I think that for lawyers, I mean, it's a great idea to participate in some sort of legal organization to help advance whatever interests you have. I think that's a great way of getting involved beyond donating to campaigns or candidates. That's important too.
Oh yes, definitely.
You asked me what advice I would give for future lawyers seeking to transition to employment law, and I would just say that there are so many areas that touch on employment law, and so even if you can't go directly into a firm that has an employment law practice area, you can still probably use your current practice to become familiar with employment law, because it's just such a sprawling field. And then I would also say that lawyers looking to get into employment law should really pay attention to what's happening at the Supreme Court, including the recent decisions that you probably know about interpreting Title VII as prohibiting discrimination against lesbian, gay, and transgender employees. So often those decisions have a huge impact. And I think paying attention to those and generally keeping your finger on the pulse of employment law in the field is a really good way of just staying abreast, so that if there is a moment where you can transition to an employment law practice area, you'll really be able to jump in, and you'll know kind of what practice area you want to kind of lean into. There are just, as I said before, the employment law field is so broad and there's so many different ways of practicing employment law. So I think those decisions and just knowing generally what's going on in the field, I think, is a really good way of making your transition to that practice area.
For sure. You mentioned the SCOTUS case. I think the decision came out a couple weeks ago, right?
Right.
That brought in the classification, so that the protected classes. I mean, so that's great. That was great to hear. Our, at least in Texas, state bar president, that he was only sworn in 3 or 4 weeks ago, and he provided a legal analysis, what he calls a legal analysis on Facebook, but on someone who was purportedly electioneering, which means someone who is wearing some type of shirt related to a political campaign or a candidate, and this lady was wearing a BLM shirt. Now this topic can go left and right. I mean, in terms of tangent related conversations. But my question to you is, this person who made these comments, in addition to his legal analysis, someone traced back, I think 5 years ago, when BLM first gained some movement, I think after the Michael Brown murder in St. Louis, that he posted a picture of a police officer kneeling down on a protester. Now, it shouldn't matter what race it is, because it was flip-flopped, but the meme said, "Justice can happen before a trial." This person also happens to be a criminal defense attorney. So it's very shocking in many ways. And now he's the president of the state bar. Now I can attest to you that when we receive all these flyers, emails about the election for state bar, it's similar to a regular campaign, political campaign. They just have their bullet points of their resume. So of course it looks fine and dandy. They look qualified to a certain extent. But now that there's the research movement of the BLM, and the cancel culture, do you have any thoughts on why it's important to have, for attorneys, bar leadership that is welcoming and of course not racist? Well, I think a lot of people use the word racist very loose. It can be loosely used, but having racial animus or like we mentioned the phrase implicit bias, because some people will just disregard that legal analysis, those comments, say, "Oh, he's not racist. I've had a pleasant experience with him. He was a mentor of mine. He lent me a hand back in the day." And so, do you have any thoughts on that? I know you're in New York, but hopefully, knock on wood, this doesn't happen in New York, and I don't think it will.
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess I have maybe a biased point of view, but I think at this point, if you don't recognize that Black Lives Matter, I just think you're woefully behind the pulse of everybody. Even corporations are espousing Black Lives Matter. So
Right.
I think at this point, for someone to not recognize that, I just think is woefully ignorant. And it's really unfortunate. I think you probably at this point lose a lot of credibility if you don't understand what that means, especially when you have kind of Democratic candidates on a popular stage. And I'm thinking of Bernie and Hillary in 2016 saying Black Lives Matter on the stage. It's not a new movement.
Right.
So, that's really, I just think it's unfortunate. I think the ABA model rules 8.4G also prohibits lawyers from discriminating in the practice of law. And so I think, we have to be mindful of that rule and really evaluate what we're saying in public and how we're practicing law, and whether that's our conduct can lead to evidence of some form of discrimination. I do think that if that what we say actually can have the effect of you know of, of kind of showing our clients whether or not we believe in them, right? So I think lawyers really have to be careful about what they say in public and what they articulate, because ultimately our clients have to trust us and trust that we're doing a good job for them.
Absolutely.
And if we're not, if our statements are undermining the job that we're doing, we really have to be careful of that. And so, and I do think that, to the effect that, to the effect that, well, let me back up. I do think that there is a movement within the legal profession, I think in big law, but in other places as well, to make the profession more diverse, to welcome more women, welcome more people of color into the workplace, to see why women and people of color aren't at partnership level, or aren't at the highest paid positions at the firm. And I think, statements that undermine that goal, which I think is a pretty common goal, I think is not helpful. It's really kind of backwards in terms of where I think the legal profession is headed in terms of being a more diverse and inclusive place, and acknowledging where we are weak in that area. So there are probably more that I can reasons why you shouldn't be racist, but
Right.
those are the things that I can think of
Yeah.
right now.
And I feel like, I really appreciate you answering this question, because we could say so many different things and go for like days on this issue. But yeah, it's very unfortunate that we found out about our state bar president. But at the same time, it's a good thing that there is a platform called Facebook, because then people can show who they really are, for better or worse. And in Texas, where there's not an official process to force someone out as president, which I'm surprised. But there's a lot of state bar leaders, directors, we call it, on the board, calling for his resignation. So that's a positive step to see where I can go. But you're absolutely right about having that clients should have trust in you, and if they find out that this situation or this lawyer has made, just as an elite, practicing law part, not even on a leadership level, but if they don't trust you, if they see that type of comment, how can they trust you in court? So that doesn't make sense to me. But anyways, I know there's a lot we can cover. We could talk about the SCOTUS case, but your time is precious. So thank you so much for sharing your information and your insight with our audience. And we'll include Outten Golden's website, your bio in the description below. And do you have any final comments for our audience?
No, I just want to thank you, John. It's such a pleasure to meet you. I haven't met you in person, but he tells me a lot about you. And I've been impressed with you and for a long time. And I love the stories that you tell me about you. So keep doing the good work. I wish you the best of luck and let's keep in touch, okay?
Likewise. Thank you so much, Chauniqua. Talk to you soon.
Thank you, John. Take care.